So all of a sudden, try and make a caricature out of it. You're like, well, no, that's not. All that's going to do is tell the little kid watching wrestling that maybe their religion is a bit silly, which is just not true, and it's not fair, and it's dangerous. Like, it can be really more dangerous, I think, than people realize.
My guest today is Simon Miller, a professional wrestler and presenter known to millions as one of the hosts of the What Culture Wrestling YouTube channel, which regularly posts wrestling-related content to over 2 million subscribers. Simon also has his own YouTube channel with a subscriber base of 300,000, where he posts more personal and often humorous content about fitness, the internet, and his wrestling journey. Simon performs on wrestling cards up and down the United Kingdom and is booked to appear on lineups in the United States in the near future. Simon is Jewish and has spoken out about anti-Semitism on his social platforms. Simon, how are you? Thank you so much for joining us.
Nah, it's my pleasure. I'm very, very well, my friend. How are you?
I'm doing good. So look, we spoke a bit about this before we started recording, but I am a wrestling fan myself. So to speak about anti-Semitism in wrestling is kind of a weird treat for me, if that doesn't sound too awful.
No, I totally get it, man. Like I'm certainly the same, and it kind of it's not an overly prevalent thing that people speak about. I suppose just because. I don't know how many Jews there are in wrestling. I don't know what the percentage is, but I would imagine it's probably quite small. But it's like all forms of bigotry or racism or anti-Semitism. I just think it's always important that we continue to talk about it, because if we don't talk about it, it's not going to go away, right? You have to continue to shine the spotlight on this stuff.
100%. So let's start with you. How did you get into wrestling?
Well, in terms of actually sort of liking it, it's such a strange situation. So my dad was he worked in TV. So when Sky TV became a thing over here, his employer just hooked us up with it. So I was like, oh my gosh, it's the coolest thing ever. Go from 4 channels or whatever it was to, 50, 60, 70, 80. And I was just flicking through it one day, and I stumbled across Bret Hart. Still can't remember who he was wrestling. And it sounds, everyone says it, but it's true. I was hooked instantly. I was like, who is this guy? What's going on? Why are they kicking each other's ass in this very specific way? And I think I was just at the right age for it to become, that thing that I just fell into for one reason or another. And I had a break, when I went off to university, as I think many people do, but then I fell back into it. And ever since, it's just a part of my daily life. And there's just something about professional wrestling that you can't get elsewhere. Like when it all works in the way that it's supposed to, it's just the best. Like, it just is. It's just brilliant. Even though at its core, it's absolutely ridiculous. But maybe that's why I like it. Maybe it kind of ties in.
100%. Now, it's interesting because a lot of people are fans, but not many fans then go on to become wrestlers. So how did you become a professional wrestler yourself?
Well, I had the thought for a while. Like, I remember during my first job in my early 20s being like, I'm gonna do it. And I tried to find, actually, that's not true. Actually, at university, I tried to do it. So even though I actually wasn't watching it, I think towards the end, I must have started to get back into it. Because remember, I hopped on a train. I went to university in Manchester. I think I hopped down a train to Nottingham, where, on the internet, they weren't like wrestling schools are today, which are actually very well run and very well put together. And the website said they were still operating, but they were not. So I turned up at an empty building that clearly hadn't been used in years. And because I was a university student, I had no money, that basically bankrupted me. So I can't make that risk again.
Oh,
so exactly right. So I didn't really know where to go. So I kind of just left it. And then a couple of times in my 20s, I tried again. So it was always there, not necessarily to go out there and have a match, but I just wanted to do some training. Do I like this? Do I not like this? Because, I've always been into health and fitness. I tried out boxing. I tried out MMA. So wrestling was like, I like those things, but not as much as I like wrestling. So I gotta like wrestling. And then, thankfully, I kind of, because I did train for a while, but I ran into a proper old school drill sergeant wrestling instructor, and he just beat the passion out of me. So I thought, well, I don't want this.
Oh,
So I
no.
kind of left that behind. And then, eventually started working for What Culture. And honestly, around the same time, a wrestling school opened up like 10 minutes from my house. And I remember saying to myself, this is it. Like, What Culture are happy for me to document this as part of my, our video agreement that we've got. I've always wanted to do it. And I would have been happy to travel, an hour, 2 hours down the road, whatever. This is like a 10-minute drive. If you don't do it now, you're letting yourself down. So I kind of, I took that as a wink, wink, nudge, nudge from the powers that be. And I was like, right, I'm going to do it.
That is so cool. So how long have you been wrestling now?
So I started training in 2016, and I debuted in 2018. So we can technically say 5 years, but there was a big 2-year period when nothing happened in the world.
Yes, I remember that.
Yes, I think most people do. So 3 years is what I tell most people. 2018 I started, and then 2019 was pretty good, but then really it's been this year where we've kicked back off again.
Yeah, that's awesome. Now, in addition to being a professional wrestler, you're also a proud Jewish person. Have you ever had your Judaism remarked upon by others in the wrestling industry, either positively or negatively?
So, I mean, in terms of comments, and to YouTube comments or social media, yes. Now, I'll be the first to say that it's never been overwhelming or anything like that. But if I ever do just drop it in a video, because I don't really think about it, right? It just usually ties into a point you're making. You'll say something and your brain will go, oh, this is kind of like when this happened at my bar mitzvah or whatever, whatever
Right.
it could be. So, I got no shame in talking about it. And often when you drop that in, or the YouTube stuff, I mean, you always get what half the time, I don't even think people know what they're saying. I just think they just like to take shots because unfortunately that's the world we live in. The only thing I've ever really got in wrestling itself is, and I don't want to say this is specific to wrestling, because it's actually, I would say this is the number one comment that I've got throughout my life when people find out I'm Jewish, is they go, look Jewish. And I'm like, do you realize, I know you don't mean it in a bad way, but that's being anti-Semitic, because you think I have to walk in here, I don't know, with big curly hair and a beard. I don't know. I don't know what they're expecting. Like, I do have a big nose, so I'm like, do we talk about that? Like, but I try. So I do try and tell people that I know it's not coming from a bad place. Like, I really, really understand that. But again, this is the problem, right? Is that sometimes it dresses itself up as something different, and people don't understand. So yeah, in terms of actually being in wrestling, it's more those. It's more those kind of comments, whereas the more vicious ones have just been ones that have come up in my life because, again, some people are just uneducated and bad. Just bad. But, I know it does exist because I've talked to, other people that are Jewish in wrestling. And, I guess, I don't know whether it's the way that I came into it. But, I know some other Jewish wrestlers who have had some abhorrent things sort of thrown at them under the guise of, I'm a bad guy wrestler and you're a fan in the crowd, so I'll make comments. And it's like there's got to be a line to that, otherwise we're just going to fall off completely.
Yeah, definitely. It's been very interesting to see how the Jewishness of wrestlers and on-screen wrestling personas has been dealt with in WWE, the world's foremost global wrestling promotion. I know you know that, but just for our listeners who may not be into wrestling. Sometimes there is virtually no explicit mention of a wrestler's Jewish identity, like in the case of Goldberg, which is a very Ashkenazi Jewish name. So many Jews will he's Jewish, but non-Jews may not. But then you have Paul Heyman, the on-screen advocate for wrestlers like Brock Lesnar and Roman Reigns, who is very open about his Jewishness in WWE programming, often using Yiddish words and making references to Jewish festivals. There is also a documentary on the WWE network in which he reveals that his mother was a Holocaust survivor. What do you make of the way Jewishness is handled in WWE today?
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, I suppose by and large, they do stay away from most religions. I mean, it does creep in here and there. Obviously, I'm sure we'll talk about Colt Cabana at some point and what they did with him, which is when your eyebrow goes up and you're like, wait a minute, I don't know how I feel about this. Whereas mean, I'm speaking completely speculatively here. I would imagine that Paul Heyman throughout his career has had some terrible things shouted at him, right? But I think he's the kind of guy that just brushes it off. He's like, yeah, whatever. There's nothing you can say that can hurt me. Hence why he can go in the ring and be quite proud, quite open. I'm Jewish. This is about, my mother's story. Dropping the schmucks, the schmerels, all the great words that bubblers, all the words that we enjoy hearing. Whereas Goldberg, you're right. No one ever really touched on that. Even in WCW, I don't think that they touched on that.
No.
And I remember my nan. She actually, years and years ago now. She actually, years and years to the point. I think he must have still been in WCW. She went to a book signing of his to get his book signed for me as a present.
Oh.
And all my nan wanted to do with famous people that were Jewish was talk about their Jewishness. So, again, it's secondhand information, but she told me she just went up to him and she was all like, "Oh, my son watches wrestling. My grandson watches wrestling. I don't really know much about it." And she was like, it seems like you're on the road a lot. Like, how are you able to stay kosher? What do you do on the high holy days? And apparently he was very, gracious, as everyone says that he is, and admitted that maybe, he wasn't the most kosher Jew in the world just because it's impossible. But I remember him, I swear, maybe, it's me rejigging the information in my brain, but I'm 99% sure she told me that he took the high holy days, of rest. And this is WCW. I don't know what he did in WWE. And so you kind of look at it like that and you think, okay, well, if that was the case, he must have been, quite adamant about it. And he must have been quite vocal about it. And it never sort of shifted across. I can't remember one WCW storyline or WWE storyline where they touched on that. However, if you put a gun to my head and said, do you think it was ever broached backstage that they'd like to do it? Yes, probably, just based on everything else. But otherwise, I guess at the moment in WWE, it almost kind of feels neutral, right? It almost feels like and I'd go with politics too. The religious and politics stuff, obviously by choice, doesn't exist in order to try and, bring in as large, a larger fan base as possible. But it is interesting because it's not like they haven't done it before. I mean, the Muhammad Hassan character was all, all about that, which was controversial to say the least. So I don't know. It's kind of a weird one because you think and I'm sure there has been stuff that I'm not thinking about. Like, for example, there was absolutely, I've read too many articles about it. Someone definitely pitched a Nazi character. And obviously there have been Nazi characters in wrestling, but I mean, after the big WWE/WWF boom, somebody backstage definitely went, "Oh man, we've got to get a Nazi character in there."
God.
Like I understand. I don't understand. No. When wrestling was super duper about stereotypes, it doesn't surprise me is a better way to put it that happened. I can't remember. There was loads of them. I can't remember now. But it was almost like South Park rules. It felt like everyone was doing this crazy stuff. You're like, oh, well, I don't really think this is appropriate, but you're just pulling these ideas. Whereas, after the big boom and WWE taking over the world, it's interesting. You think there would have been more, but actually, well, there is one though, isn't there? So I don't know. But like this, I don't think I'd ever want to be in a backstage meeting at WWE when they're talking about it. Would be my guess.
No, neither would I. Now, you mentioned Colt Cabana. Let's talk about that. So the way Jewishness is handled in WWE now is very different to how it was handled in the mid-2000s. So the Jewish identity of the wrestler Colt Cabana, it wasn't handled the best. He signed under the WWE gimmick of Scotty Goldman, where he would appear in segments where in post-edit, without his knowing, Yiddish klezmer music and sort of stereotyping sound effects were added in. He also said that one of the trainers would refer to him not as Colt Cabana, but as Kike Cabana. Now, to our knowledge, WWE has never commented on or disputed Colt's allegations, but neither are they confirmed. What do you remember about the Scotty Goldman character, and what are your thoughts on these rather disturbing allegations?
Yeah, so I mean, that was a time when I wasn't watching wrestling it was kind of, everyone has a break from wrestling, but you hear about it because, again, I'm still active in that world and I'm a Jewish guy. So you see that headline, you're like, what? And I mean, it's really even hard to come up with the words for it because, I mean, Scotty Goldman, the name alone, you're like, what
Yeah.
did you do? Did you just type in like common Jewish names? I've got it. I figured it out. And to add all the effects in afterwards, it must. I always thought about it from a Colt Cabana point of view. It must have put him in such an awkward position because you've made it to the top, right? You're in WWE. Most people know his story. My word, the amount of hours and hard work he puts in, and then the one thing they they lean on you for is, oh well, he's Jewish, so we'll make him a Jewish guy, and you're like, it almost undermines everything else that he's done. And again, the absolute massive issue with it is, again, I know it was absolutely, you got to bring it up. They were doing it with the Muhammad Al character around about the same kind of an era. But you think, well, there are so many people in this company that will have different religions and different thoughts on this kind of stuff, and yet, because they're whichever religion they may subscribe to, because that's not as weird and kooky. We won't make that a thing, but he's Jewish. Well, we gotta talk about that, and it is disappointing. I mean, it just is, because it's like there's more to it than that. I'm not saying that you couldn't come up with an interesting Jewish storyline if everything is treated with respect, but that's the point. It's not, is it? Putting in, Yiddish type music, not telling him, and using slurs like that. It's just, it makes you want to stop watching. I think that's the big takeaway, because you're like, okay, well, if that's going on, what else is going on that I'm not seeing? And ultimately, let's face it, it's why he didn't hang around there for very long. From all sides, it was a very, I hate the word, but it's the word everyone used, very toxic. It's just a very toxic atmosphere, and they put him in a position that was untenable, because so you go out there, and whether you're a good guy or a bad guy, the major determining factor is, but you're Jewish. But I don't. It shouldn't be a good thing. It's just be a thing. It's just it's a choice, or it's like whatever the word you want to use is to describe religion. You should never shine a spotlight on it like that, because you're doing it as almost as if to say, oh, it's a bit strange, isn't it? Ooh. And that does, to an audience that may be a little bit ignorant towards it, or maybe a little bit uneducated, that may just back up certain ideas, or it may actually enforce ideas they never thought they would had before. And I know personally, for me, if there was, I suppose Goldberg would have been it. Like, let's say on commentary, maybe they did, maybe they didn't. Every now and then you just mentioned that he was of Jewish faith, as somebody may do a sports commentary, just to add a little bit of flavor to proceedings. As a small Jewish kid, that'd be the coolest thing ever. There must have been a reason my nan went to get that autograph. So we must have found out at some point. But it's just, it's representation, right? It just makes you go, well, that's a badass thing. Yeah. Maybe one day I can grow up and do that too. That's just how people think.
Right.
So all of a sudden, try and make a caricature out of it. You're like, well, no, that's not. All that's going to do is tell the little kid watching wrestling that maybe their religion is a bit silly, which is just not true, and it's not fair, and it's dangerous. Like, it can be really more dangerous, I think, than people realize.
I agree. Now, let's talk about how wrestling is handled in a different wrestling promotion, arguably WWE's biggest rival right now. One of the most popular wrestlers today is MJF, Maxwell Jacob Friedman, who is signed to the promotion AEW. Now, like Paul Heyman, Maxwell also leans into his Jewishness and has even cut impassioned promos, which is basically when a wrestler delivers a speech inside the ring, about being bullied for being Jewish at school. This is sort of groundbreaking, because while years ago anti-Semitism may have been played for laughs in wrestling, it is now being treated as a serious topic used to further a wrestler's character development. What are you thinking when you see MJF discuss anti-Semitism in the ring, both as a Jewish person and as a wrestler?
I find it really inspiring and really motivational. Like, I really, really do, because he's been, it's not something he just started doing because obviously he's the AW World Champion as we're speaking. So he's made it to the top, right? He's established. He's been doing it the whole time, and he's been shining a spotlight on it, and he's been telling his stories, and he just, be it on social media or interviews, like this. Again, the fact that he doesn't shy away from it, and the fact that he's tied it up in his character, and the fact that he's proud of it. I mean, MJF is like a mid-20-year-old guy, so I've got a lot of years on him. But even then, I do you look up to it because you're like, that's so cool to see somebody doing that. And he has shared terrible, terrible stories of some of the anti-Semitism that he has experienced in wrestling, especially when growing up. Which, I mean, I don't like saying things like this because I don't have the statistics to hand, but you would imagine it's probably more prevalent in America, just through percentages, if nothing else. There's more people over there, etc. So, I can only imagine some of the things that have been said to him. But for him to carry on, make it to where that he has got to tie that Jewishness so much into his character, and also constantly on social media call it out for the BS that it is. It's great because if he is doing it, somebody that has such he does have clout in wrestling now. He does. That should then roll downhill, and other people can get the confidence to go, well, actually, maybe I shouldn't, maybe I shouldn't let this happen, and I won't let this happen. And as soon as you start doing that, and as soon as the ball starts heading in that direction, you can. It really, really, I think, can inspire change because people look up to MJF. Why wouldn't you, right? He is 25, 26 years old, and in the second biggest company in the world, he is their champion. I mean, that's a success story right there. And he's gone to show you can go through some really bad stuff, but still come out the other side and still wear it as a badge of honor. Again, I know I keep saying that, but it's not like he has to hide it away now. It's not like he went, oh, I know what I'm going to have to do. Shift it to one side. No, comes out with suits with Star of David's on it. I'm like, yes, damn right, Maxwell. You do it again. Only problem is you can't say this to him on Twitter because he's so in character all the time. He'll tell you to F off, which I also love. But no, I think he's doing a really, really important job. And I bet it's not as easy as he makes it seem, because I imagine he's been through some real horrible stuff that has scarred him. And yet the way he's decided to approach that is to, I don't want to say go on the offensive. That sounds too aggressive, but at least be on the front foot with it, which, I love. I really, really love it.
Yeah, he's really reclaiming it and using it for his own creativity, which is really awesome to see. Now, Simon, you took to Twitter to discuss MJF's promo, in which you said that he was, quote, speaking about anti-Semitism, which is close to my own experiences. I was wondering, could you elaborate a bit more on that, and why is it close to your own experiences?
So when he talked about the anti-Semitism that he'd suffered, it was more just a case of things that I'd experienced sort of throughout my life in general. The big one that always stands out to me was in my first job when I was working in a cinema. I mean, it was the most dumb, ridiculous, easygoing job in the world. You made popcorn, you took cinema tickets, you stood in the theaters as a concierge or whatever. And there was this one guy, I can't remember his name for the life of me, but I used to get on with him quite well. And as always, we saw each other every day because it was one of those jobs. And my Judaism came up, and I remember he looked at me and he just said, "Oh, we can't be friends anymore. I'm not allowed to like Jews." And that was kind of that's my first, proper memory as a, fully formed adult about having something said that to me. And I kind of, I did press him on it as much as I sort of, I probably should have pressed him more in hindsight, but, I did press him on it. And it all came down to the fact that, that is what had been instilled in him as a child from his family. We don't like Jewish people. I never found out why, but that was the deal. And I think, there were other instances throughout, but it was the one. And the reason I think I remember that one so well, and why it tied into so much about what MJF said, is that for a good while there, and probably still a little bit today, there was always a slight reservation when Judaism would come up, just because of something that happened all those years ago. So when you hear someone like MJF talking about it, I totally understand where he's coming from, because nobody should do that. Nobody should second guess, as long as it's a good thing, or as long as it's something that doesn't hurt anybody else. Like, I get it. If I said something like, "Oh, I like kicking dogs," they'd be like, "Wait a minute, that's not a good thing. What are you talking about?" But to experience things like that to the point you actually, not worry is the wrong word, just slightly apprehensive of sharing it in a wider group is, it's just bad and it's terrible. So yeah, when you do see somebody of that ilk going out there, like I say, on the front foot and being so just positive with it, I suppose. Yeah, it does help, and it does remind you not to worry about those things. And again, I've had other things, throughout that. People just throw ridiculous things at you. and it always brings that thing back up in your brain again. And you're a bit like, am I suppose what you're thinking is, am I among people that will actually just accept that because they should, because it's such a, in the grand scheme of things, in terms of how it affects other people, it's just absolutely nothing. Like, it cannot affect anybody else unless they choose that they want it to affect them.
Absolutely. I want to talk about you and your Jewish identity, if that's all right.
Yeah.
What did your Jewish upbringing look like, and what does your Jewish identity look like today?
So again, Tuesday classes to learn my bar mitzvah portion, Sunday school to learn as much about Jewish life and Hebrew as much as I possibly could. Passover dinners, not eating on Yom Kippur, synagogue on Rosh Hashanah, going Saturday mornings to synagogue. All of that stuff was in my childhood, and I was truly grateful for it, because this is such a weird. This is the way I always describe it to everyone, because you get into these debates, and some people are like, you have to let a child grow up free of all that stuff, I suppose, and then let them make their own choices. And I go, okay, that is genuinely genuinely my experience, going to synagogue, learning Hebrew, doing my bar mitzvah, eating horrible Passover food, which I never liked as a kid. I was like, why does it all taste disgusting? Then you grow up and realize, oh right, bitter herbs are not meant to be nice. But whereas and I'll talk about this in 1 second, whereas I am still very much a Jewish man, and live my life as such. My brother went the other way. He kind of doesn't believe in it, I suppose, is the best way to put it. Whereas my sister is somewhere in the middle. So that's what I always tell people. I'm like, well, actually, I think you should probably give kids, this is our traditions. This is our family. And then when they get to an age when they can make their own decisions, I think people will be able to. But absolutely, it was completely embedded when I was growing up. And it just meant something to me, and it's always meant something to me. And through hard times, it's always been something I've been able to fall back on. So to this day, ham, pork, and bacon. I won't touch it. High holy days, absolutely, are in the calendar every single year. Making sure I observe Passover, celebrating Hanukkah, and everything like that. I'm much like Bill Goldberg. Probably could be better with my with my kosher ways, but as a man that decided he wanted to have a physique, sometimes it can be tough. But I always do still try and lean in that direction. And I still try to get to synagogue as much as I can. I don't go as much as I should, but how many? I mean, honestly, that's like every Jewish person I've ever spoken to. It's like, well, I do need to go more. And then, they struggle to do so. But no, I think above all else, when it comes to me, it's a very I love the community spirit, and I do love going to shul, like I really, really do. But in terms of how I use it, whatever the right word would be, on a day-to-day life, it's very, very personal. It's very, very insular. It's the things it means to me. It's how it reminds me to live as a human being, how to treat other people, all those kind of things. And yeah, it's just something that I would say that props me up constantly. And I can't, I respect anybody's beliefs. Whatever you want to believe is what you believe. But yeah, I can't imagine living my life without having that in the background, or even in the foreground, whatever it be, just sort of surrounding my entity as a human. I just take a lot of comfort in it, I think, is the best way to put it.
That's really, really cool. Now, in addition to being a professional wrestler, you are also known to millions as a YouTuber, both for What Culture Wrestling and your own personal YouTube channel. How and why did you decide that you wanted to do YouTube?
It's kind of funny. So I was in video games for a while. I really like video games, and I remember I was on the bus back from my last university exam, and I was reading a Nintendo magazine, and my girlfriend at the time said to me, what are you going to do now? Because university was over, and because I was reading this magazine, I thought, oh, maybe I'll go write about video games. And then I thought, actually, that's a pretty good idea. So I just pursued that, and very, very quickly, once I got into that, and YouTube started to become a thing, it was sort of like just at the point it was about to explode. I was like, man, these two things must be able to be married together. And we had a DVD that came with the magazine just to drive the price up. It said free DVD, absolutely wasn't free. Absolutely drove the price of the magazine up. And all we used to do is we used to have the most recent trailers, and the team would commentate over the top. So I went to everyone and said, well, we should do this on YouTube. Like, scrap the DVD. Let's just put it out there. It'd be a great advert for the magazine. And of course, nobody wanted to do it because the price would have come down. But by that point, I'd already planted the seed in my head. And they did let me do a few YouTube stuff, but they weren't pushing it. So I left to join a video game company that really was doing it. And because they embraced it so much, I just fell in love with the idea that you can put yourself on television. Essentially, I know it's different, but that's the way they used to sell it back there. And I loved how creative it was, and I loved how little red tape there was. And after doing it for video games for a few years, I started to think, well, I like video games, but I love professional wrestling. So I thought maybe I'd be able to sort of make the jump across. And actually what turned out happening was, because I had all these videos, when an opening came up at What Culture, I was able to send them like a live CV. Like, well, here's all the videos I have done. I had a few random ones I'd done about wrestling just for fun. And, very graciously, they let me on board. And yeah, ever since it's gone okay. But yeah, it was something that I was very, very aware of very, very early on, even before sort of like the classic YouTubers had blown up. I just thought it was a great platform to be creative on, which is two things that I really wanted to do.
You're sort of renowned for your ups and downs series. How did that start?
I don't know. So, I mean, there was absolutely something that What Culture had. When I joined, they had just started doing the review shows. And I think they just agreed, we should call it ups and downs, just to give it a bit more like engagement, in the sense that it's not just recapping it, it's not just reviewing it. It's got a score system to it, right? Because people love scores. Yeah. And I kind of warmed to that too, because I've been doing video game reviews, and I knew that no one cared about the text. They cared about 8 out of 10 or 4 out of 10. Like, oh my gosh. So yeah, that's how it did it. And it used to be me and a guy called Jack, who obviously moved on to other things. And then after a while, they just said, Simon, do you want to do it permanently? And I was like, yeah, okay. And if you go back and watch my early attempt, it's not like what it is now. But after a while, I decided there is way too much negativity in wrestling. Everyone is moaning about it. It's meant to be fun. It's meant to be entertaining. So I just turned it into the most lighthearted, positive review show ever, where you really have to go out of your way to get a down. Like, you really have to try. And while for a while that annoyed people, I think I, by accident, created this little niche for myself, where thankfully quite a decent community was like, oh no, we like this. It's nice just to be nice. Yes. And from there it just kind of spiraled.
Well, you're a positive guy, man. I feel like it's very true to who you are. Now, what are some of the highlights from your wrestling career?
Oh wow! I mean, there's so many. I mean, the one that I always talk about is I visited places that I wouldn't even have. If someone gave me an infinite supply of money, I mean, I may have gone there eventually, but they weren't on my list. So, a few years ago, I got to wrestle in South Korea, which was incredible. I mean, completely different culture. It opens your eyes to sort of how big the world is. Again, I got to wrestle loads in America last year, which was always on my bucket list. And I've got, so many different bookings around the world this year, which is absolutely crazy. But it's the people you meet as well. Like, there's so many, former WWE stars or former TNA stars or former American stars, obviously, they'll turn up on the indie scene as well. And you get to work with them, and you get to, pick their brain. But ultimately, it's, there's nothing better than, your entrance music hitting, you go out, you get a nice response, and you have this idea for a match, and everyone reacts exactly how you want them to react. Like, I had a match literally 2 days ago for Sovereign Pro Wrestling. They're crazy because they put me in the main event. I was like, what are you doing? But bless them. They have faith in me. So, it was the first time I really had a match where the reactions of the match itself mattered. Like, we needed to ensure that there was shocks and twists and turns, especially with some of the, the near falls in the match, which is basically where it looks like you're going to lose 1, 2. Oh my gosh, you kick out at the last second. And, for the last 2 minutes of that match, we totally had them. And they had no idea how it was going to end. They totally believed, in what we wanted them to believe. And I remember laying there after, one of the near falls and being like, this is fantastic. And this is like years in, and I'm still finding, all these things. But I think the best thing about it is absolutely, I mean, it's a bit like YouTube. This is a real ridiculous thing to tie in, but I'll do it anyway. I think one of the addictive things about YouTube, and one of the negatives tying into what we've been talking about, is you upload a video and you get instant reaction, be it comments or, people tweeting you. And it's the same with wrestling. As soon as you walk out there, you get an instant reaction. So you get that instant rush. and you get that sort of instant validation or whatever it may be. And again, it can go the wrong way too. Sometimes people will scream things they shouldn't be screaming, and especially on YouTube, tying it to anti-Semitism. That's absolutely where I get the most anti-Semitic comments, and every time it makes me just, it still beggars belief. But there's always good and bad, and the fact you can just get that rush straight away and be in the moment. I mean, Stone Cold Steve Austin said it best. You may as well call yourself a drug addict because you're. It's true. You really are.
Do you have any tips for people looking to get into professional wrestling?
Yeah, I mean, I say the same thing all the time. Well, first of all, you need a thick skin. That's what I say about YouTube as well. Again, I think this is a good platform to talk about that. People are going to say horrible things at you, and always remember, half the time they don't actually know what they're saying. They've just read it elsewhere, which is still terrible and it's still ignorant. But I think it's important to note that. But just make sure you're having fun. It's the one thing that I like to tell everybody. Go and give it a go. Go out there, see what happens. And if you're not having fun and you're not entertaining yourself, just go and do something else. Like, I think so many people feel like they have to stick with it because otherwise they've let themselves down or they failed. I don't agree with that at all. I think the success in life is trying things, actually betting on yourself and going, you know what, I'm going to give that a go. And if it doesn't work out, that's great. You can cross it off your list and you can use that time to try something else. So, yeah, my major thing I always tell people is just go and do it. There's no reason it can't be you. Doesn't matter what kind of shape you're in. Wrestling training will get you in shape. But also, yeah, always be aware that this is meant to be a good thing. It's meant to enrich your life. And if it doesn't, that's not a knock on you. It just means you tried something, you accepted that it wasn't working out, and you can go and do something else.
That's awesome. As we draw to a close, I got to ask you a question that I ask all of our guests, which is, if someone who is not Jewish approaches you and says that they want to help in the fight against anti-Semitism, where should they start?
I think just by talking about it, to be completely honest, talking to friends, calling things out when they hear it, which I understand is the hardest thing in the world. But, there's nothing worse than seeing a group of people and one person is making terrible comments. And again, it's not easy, but no one speaks up about it, right? So you think, well, that person now is going to walk away thinking they didn't say anything wrong. So I would always say that. And on the internet too, it's so easy to tweet out something horrible, but it's also so easy to respond to that person. And I guess, you could almost have more courage doing it there because that's why they do it to begin with, because they know there's going to be no repercussions. So it would be the same to you. So yeah, that would always be my thing, is always remember that, we're all human beings. We should all respect each other no matter what our faith is, our credence, our skin color. We're all trying to get through this crazy life together as best we can. So yeah, just trying to call that stuff out, especially from someone that isn't Jewish, because then you kind of, you build up this amazing community. I think that would be amazing. Or even if you don't want to do that, which I understand because it can be hard, just reading about this stuff and educating yourself, about all of it. And, I'm ignorant to stuff. The word ignorant sometimes sounds a bit aggressive, but I'm ignorant to stuff too. Of course I am. And I want people to tell me, what I need to know so that I don't fall into that trap again. And I would say it's the same about Judaism. Go out there, read about all of this stuff, figure out what you should say and you shouldn't say. Because that's the other thing I get a lot too. People think some terms are endearing. No, they're not. And even if you have a relationship with someone who does think it's endearing, that's okay. That's a little thing you've got going on. But you need to understand that doesn't copy and paste to the entire planet. Again, I mean, just to sort of wrap it off. The bump in the nose kind of a thing. The amount of times people have done, oh yeah, you do have a little bump in your nose, and I'm like, bro, that's not a thing. That is not a thing. You just read something, and you haven't followed up on it. So yeah, anything like that, I think all will help, because it's a marathon and it's not a sprint, and it's going to be little pieces of information and details that get us to where we want to be.
Very, very good advice, I think. Simon, please tell the listeners, what have you got coming up and where can people find you? Get your stuff in, as they say in the wrestling.
Right, exactly, yeah. Well, I mean, the best place is always my social media, at Simon316 on Instagram and Twitter. That's like a hub where I'll always be tweeting stuff out. But yeah, you can find me on YouTube as well. Search for Simon Miller. What Culture Wrestling, of course, if you want to get my more specific wrestling stuff. And in terms of wrestling dates, like I said, I'll paste them all over social media. But if you're in the north of the country, the south of the country, I've got some bookings in Scotland and again around the world. And I would always love to see people. There's nothing better than shaking someone's hand and saying hello in person.
Simon Miller, thank you so much for coming on Podcast Against Antisemitism. I've really enjoyed this.
Honestly, it's my pleasure. When you guys reached out, I was like, definitely something I want to be involved in. And yeah, I genuinely appreciate you allowing me to talk about this.